I signed away my entire future on the day I buried my father, and I didn't even know it. That morning I stood by his grave, the wind cutting through my black dress like it wanted to punish me. My hands were trembling not just from the cold but from the hollow feeling in my chest. I had just lost the only person in this world who had ever truly loved me. The man who built an empire from scratch and raised me in the fumes and hum of his auto shop. My father was everything. And not even 24 hours later my stepmother handed me a pen with a soft smile and said, "This is just paperwork. You'll want to get this out of the way quickly so you can grieve in peace." Peace. There was no such thing. But I signed. Because I trusted her. Because she had married my father when I was 9 and raised me after my mom died. Because she said we were family. And because grief had made me stupid. I didn't realize until it was far too late that I hadn't just signed some estate documents. I had signed away ownership of my father's entire company. The empire he'd spent 40 years building, the one he promised would one day be mine, was now legally under her and her son Eli's control. All of it. Gone in ink. For the next week I wandered around in a daze. I kept thinking about what Dad had said to me the day before he died. He could barely speak but he pulled me close and whispered, "Protect the business, Danny. Here's now. Don't let them." He didn't finish. He never got to. I thought I was doing what he wanted. I thought Judith was helping me. But when I showed up to the office 3 days later to sign off on payroll, my badge didn't work. My email was locked. I called Judith in a panic, thinking it was a mistake. She answered like I was interrupting her spa day. "Danielle," she said coolly, "you really should have read what you signed." My chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" "I thought those were probate documents." She sighed like I was a child asking too many questions. "Your father made a lot of emotional decisions before he passed. We needed to correct those. You're not cut out to run a company, sweetheart. You work hard, sure, but this is a multi-million-dollar business. It needs structure. Eli understands that." I stood there, staring at my reflection in the locked glass door of the building I'd helped build. My name was still on the parking space. My diploma from Wharton Business School still hung inside my office. I had helped scale Dad's chain from 5 shops to 14 in just 6 years. And now I was being erased like none of that ever happened. I went home that night to find an eviction notice taped to my apartment door. Apparently, Judith had also pulled my corporate housing agreement. And since I had technically resigned from the company, according to the documents I signed, I was no longer eligible to stay there. In 1 week I had lost everything. My father, my job, my home. My entire identity. And worst of all, they had planned it. Judith and Eli waited until my father was buried, until I was too broken to question anything, and then they took the empire he and I built and claimed it as their own. The next time I saw Eli, he was sitting in my father's old leather chair, wearing my father's Rolex, giving orders like he'd earned the right. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just stared. Because somewhere deep inside I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always start with fire. Sometimes it begins in silence. And from that day on I made myself a promise. I would rebuild from nothing. Not to prove anything to them. But because my father's blood runs in my veins. And empires are in my DNA. When you're stripped of everything, the silence hits louder than any betrayal. The first night after the eviction, I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot with nowhere to go. My entire life, clothes, laptop, the box of photos from Dad's hospital room, was stuffed into the backseat like the aftermath of a hurricane. That car was mine only because Dad had given it to me after I closed our biggest franchise deal. The one Judith and Eli Dow profited from. I remember staring out the windshield, watching people push shopping carts, laughing with their kids and going home to lives that made sense. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But mostly I wanted to ask the universe what I had done to deserve any of this. A notification lit up my phone. An email from Judith's lawyer. Apparently there was a final document I hadn't signed. One last insult. I was being asked to waive any right to contest the ownership transfer in court. They were offering me a check for $50,000 as a gesture of goodwill. $50,000. For the legacy my father bled for. For the business he built with his bare hands and trusted me to lead. I laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was the kind that catches in your throat like glass. Then I cried until the windows fogged and the battery died from the heater running too long. The next morning I drove 2 towns over and rented the cheapest room I could find at a roadside motel. I spent 3 weeks there. I didn't eat much. I couldn't sleep. I watched old home videos on repeat. Dad laughing in the shop, covered in grease, saying, "One day this'll all be yours, Danny girl. One day." And now I didn't even have a desk to sit behind. I hit rock bottom on a Tuesday afternoon when I got rejected from a job at a local parts store. Overqualified, they said. I walked back to the motel feeling like a ghost in my own life. That night I opened my laptop, the only connection I had left to the world I once ran, and stared at my empty inbox. Then I opened my LinkedIn profile. It was still there. Still listed me as VP of Strategy at Miles Auto Group. That title, that name, it didn't feel like mine anymore. So I deleted it. Then I did something wild. I opened a new profile. Started fresh. New email. New headline, consultant. Former Auto Group strategist. Building from the ground up. I posted one update. Sometimes rock bottom is the foundation you didn't know you needed. I closed the laptop, not expecting anything to come from it. But the next morning I woke up to over 30 messages. Old classmates, colleagues, even franchise owners who hadn't heard about my father's death or the takeover reached out. Some were shocked. Some were furious. But most said the same thing. If you ever decide to build something again, let me know. And for the first time in weeks I felt something flicker inside me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hope. It was purpose. Judith and Eli had taken the company. But they hadn't taken me. They couldn't erase the relationships I'd built, the strategies I had created, or the name I had made for myself in the auto world. And they certainly couldn't erase what I was capable of. I began sketching out a business model, something leaner, smarter, more ethical. I called it Ironclad Automotive Solutions. A consulting service for independent shops and franchises that wanted to grow without selling out their values. By week's end I had 3 meetings booked. Not charity meetings, real interest. Word had spread quickly that I was out and people wanted to know why. I didn't give them gossip. I gave them plans, strategies, roadmaps, revenue models that I knew worked because I'd built them before, without Eli's help, without Judith's interference. I worked out of coffee shops, motel lobbies, even my car when Wi-Fi was too spotty. And slowly I started earning again. Enough to move out of the motel. Enough to rent a small apartment in a nearby city and get a second-hand desk for my new home office. Every day I woke up with a hunger I hadn't felt in years. Not to destroy them, but to become undeniable. Judith thought she'd buried me in paperwork. She had no idea she'd planted a seed. I didn't need revenge to fuel me anymore. The wins started speaking for themselves. By the end of the first quarter, Ironclad Automotive Solutions had on board 7 clients. 3 of them former Miles Auto franchise owners who left because they hated the new leadership. One called Eli a sweaty numbers guy with no soul, and I couldn't help but laugh. Another told me Judith was charging outrageous franchise fees and pocketing the difference without reinvesting in operations. It was like the business Dad built was being gutted and sold for scraps and no one at the top cared. Meanwhile, I was helping my clients build smarter supply chains, introduce loyalty programs, and train their teams in customer service techniques I'd created years ago. Every success they had felt like a piece of my name being reclaimed. So I stayed quiet. No public statements. No exposés. Let them have their empire. I was building something that couldn't be stolen. And yet karma has a funny way of taking attendance. I heard whispers through the grapevine. One franchise defaulted. Then another. Eli tried to secure new capital, but his pitch deck was missing the heart of the company. Me. Judith apparently had grown paranoid, obsessed with the idea that I was trying to destroy them from the outside. I wasn't. But the fact that she believed it, that was satisfying enough. One day I got a call from a former board member, someone I'd known since I was 12. "Danielle, do you know what they're saying about you?" he asked, his voice tight. "No," I said, closing my laptop. "What?" "That you're poaching accounts. That you're working with insiders to sabotage Judith and Eli's leadership. I laughed softly. I'm building something. That's all. He paused. Well, keep building. You've always had the real vision. 2 weeks later, I found myself on a panel at an automotive industry summit in Chicago. The topic was rebuilding after corporate collapse. The irony nearly made me choke. I sat next to executives from companies that had actually folded, and yet there I was, quietly becoming the face of ethical automotive growth. When I walked off stage, I was met by a woman in her 50s wearing a navy power suit and a look of restrained desperation. Danielle Miles, she asked. Yes. I'm from Foster Automotive. We're looking to restructure our training and expansion model. I've heard your name come up 6 times this week. Can we talk? That meeting turned into a 6-month consulting contract. The biggest of my career so far. I used the advance to rent an office space, hire an assistant, and design a proper brand rollout. Ironclad was no longer just a survival project. It was a contender. Meanwhile, Judith's silence online spoke volumes. No press releases. No anniversary posts for the company. Rumors swirled that they were trying to sell, but no buyers were biting. One night, I got a call from someone unexpected. Danielle? It's Mason. Dad's old mechanic. He'd worked in the main shop for 22 years before suddenly retiring 6 months after Dad passed. I didn't know who else to call, he said, his voice shaking. I got a letter from Judith's lawyer. They're trying to sue me for breach of contract. Saying I talked to you about proprietary systems. My blood ran cold. Mason, we haven't even spoken in 2 years. I know. But they're panicking. The business is falling apart and they're blaming everyone but themselves. I drove to see him the next morning. His garage looked exactly the same, worn-out calendars, faded posters of classic cars, and a coffee pot that looked older than me. But the man sitting behind the desk? He looked 10 years older than when I'd last seen him. I didn't talk to anyone, he repeated. But it doesn't matter. They're lashing out. I helped him find a lawyer. I covered the fee. Not because I owed him, but because Dad would have done the same. After that, the phone calls kept coming. Franchise owners asking for advice. Former staff members seeking jobs. Industry insiders wondering if Judith was about to resign. And then came the biggest shock. A local business journal ran a front-page story. Trouble at Miles Auto Group. Lawsuits, layoffs, and a leadership crisis. I read the article 3 times, stunned. Internal memos had leaked. Turns out Eli had been siphoning money through a shell supplier business, billing Miles Auto and taking a cut for himself. Judith either didn't know or pretended not to. Investors were furious. Several had pulled out. The board was splintering. And I hadn't lifted a finger. I walked to the window of my new office that night, looking out at the skyline, fingers curled around a mug of coffee, heart pounding with something I hadn't felt in so long. Peace. Everything they took, it was rebuilding itself around me. Stronger. Smarter. Untouchable. And the house of cards they built. It was wobbling. The headlines didn't stop. By the end of the month, every major business blog in the region had a version of the same story. Miles Auto Group in crisis. More lawsuits surfaced, this time from franchise owners claiming they were misled about profit-sharing structures and forced into expensive upgrades they never agreed to. And Judith? She finally crawled out of her silence. She released a tepid statement blaming internal discrepancies and transitional growing pains. No mention of Eli. No apology. Just smoke and mirrors. But her calm didn't last long. One morning as I was reviewing Ironclad's new hiring plan, my assistant Mallory poked her head into my office. "You have a guest," she said carefully. "Judith Miles." I froze. "I told her you were busy. She's waiting in the lobby." Every cell in my body told me to run, but something deeper told me to watch her squirm. I stood slowly, smoothed down my blazer and walked out. There she was, sitting on a velvet bench under our logo, her perfect makeup betraying the dark bags beneath her eyes. Her designer purse was clutched so tight her knuckles were white. "Danielle," she said, standing as if we were old friends. "Judith." I didn't offer a smile. I only have a few minutes. She glanced around the sleek office. I saw it hit her, the realization that I had built something real. Without her. Without their stolen name. I came to talk, she said, forcing a breathy chuckle. It's funny how this all got so out of control. Which part? I asked. The lying? The forging? Or the embezzlement? Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected fire. Maybe she thought I'd still be that lost girl sitting in a cold lawyer's office. I didn't forge anything, she said quickly. It was complicated. Your father. Don't you dare, I snapped. Don't you dare speak about my father like you cared. You couldn't wait for him to die. She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. You married him for power. And when he was gone, you didn't even wait a week to start gutting his company. You pushed me out. Lied to the board. And you brought Eli in to finish the job. Her mask cracked. Just for a second. Eli's not handling things well, she admitted. He's under investigation. I tilted my head. And you came here for what? Sympathy. No, she said softly. I came to offer a solution. I folded my arms. You know the brand better than anyone. The board's in chaos. If you came back, if you helped stabilize things, they'd listen to you. We could. We. I said, nearly laughing. There is no we. You stole everything from me. Now it's falling apart and you want me to save it. Her voice cracked. You don't understand what it's like. I had to protect what was mine. What was yours? I stepped forward. You didn't build that company. You didn't bleed for it. You didn't sit with my father for hours while he sketched out logistics plans on diner napkins. I did. Tears welled in her eyes. But I felt nothing. You're not here because you regret it, I continued. You're here because karma finally caught up with you. And now you want me to clean up the mess. Judith's voice dropped. They're considering criminal charges against Eli. If I'm tied to it. You should have thought of that before you buried me. She stood there, eyes darting around the room like a caged animal. I was trying to survive, she whispered. So am I said. And I'm doing just fine. She left without another word. That night I went home and opened the last box from my father's office. I'd avoided it for months, too raw, too full of ghosts. Inside was a worn leather folder. My breath hitched when I saw the first page. My father's original business plan, hand-drawn, annotated with ideas in his messy handwriting. And on the final page, a note written in his final months, just beneath a list of future expansion hopes. Danielle sees the road ahead better than I do. If I'm not around, trust her. She's the legacy. I sat on the floor and cried. Not out of sadness, but release. I had spent so long trying to prove my worth, thinking I needed their validation. But my father had already known. They tried to erase me from the story, but they couldn't erase his truth. And now it was unfolding exactly the way it should. Judith's house was next. Rumors swirled of unpaid taxes, liens, even a fire hazard complaint on the property from one of her neighbors. When I saw the headline a few weeks later, local businesswoman's mansion severely damaged in electrical fire, I felt nothing. Just silence. I didn't need to gloat. Didn't even feel joy. Just peace. And a deep, steady knowing that the universe has its own way of balancing scales. I didn't go to the press. I didn't need to. Judith's empire, my father's empire really, was already cracking under its own weight. Eli was indicted on 4 counts of financial misconduct and conspiracy to defraud investors. They cuffed him at a fundraiser dinner in front of the same board members who once laughed me out of the room. The footage went viral. And Judith? She tried to disappear into the chaos, but you can't outrun that kind of fire. The mansion fire turned out to be electrical just like the reports said, but it felt poetic. A house built on stolen power burning down by its own faulty wiring. That summer I focused on Ironclad. We landed our biggest logistics contract yet, with a chain of organic grocers expanding across 3 states. Every win felt like a seed my father had planted finally blooming. But then came the letter. Mailed, not emailed. Cream envelope. My name in elegant cursive. It was an invitation to speak at the Legacy Leaders in Logistics conference. My father had spoken there 3 times in his career. The keynote slot was named after him now. And this year they wanted me to take the stage. I stared at the letter for a long time. Because here's what they didn't know. The conference was sponsored by the Miles Foundation. Yes, that Miles Foundation. The very shell Judith had helped establish after my father's death to appear charitable while funneling funds into her own private accounts. It was now under new management, part of the court settlement following Eli's indictment. And they were inviting me, the woman she'd tried to erase, as the face of the future. Poetic, wasn't it? For days I avoided answering. Part of me felt like accepting it would mean stepping back into that world, the one she'd poisoned. But another part of me, the part that remembered sitting cross-legged next to my dad's desk while he sketched warehouse layouts on legal pads, that part told me this was mine. Not stolen. Not inherited. Not revenge. So I went. The ballroom was glitzy and cold. Hundreds of attendees in tailored suits and sharp heels. But when I stepped onto that stage, all I could see were the warm eyes of the man who raised me to believe in my own voice. I took a deep breath. I was 17 when I first learned that power can be stolen, I began. That your name can be used against you. That the people closest to you can smile as they sharpen the knife. The room went still. But I also learned something else. You don't need revenge when you build something stronger. You don't need to destroy others to win. Sometimes the best comeback is building a life they can't touch. I didn't mention Judith by name. Didn't need to. The applause afterward was thunderous. But what really struck me was what came later. When a young woman from another logistics startup came up to me, her eyes wide with hope. I thought I was the only one, she said quietly. Trying to fight through an industry that doesn't want to make room. I smiled. Then you kick the damn door in, I told her. And if they try to shut it again, build your own. By fall, Ironclad had expanded into 2 new states. I was featured in Forbes' Small Giants. I even got a call from a documentary filmmaker who wanted to cover the quiet revolution of female-founded logistics firms. Funny how the world turns. Judith, now living in a downsized condo 2 towns over, filed for bankruptcy protection. The foundation was stripped of her involvement. Rumor had it she tried starting a new business under a different name. It flopped within months. I never reached out. Never gloated. I didn't have to. Her silence was enough. Because the woman she tried to bury had grown into something she could never control. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't chasing anything. I was rooted. And I was finally free. I stood at the edge of the river just before dawn, the mist curling over the water like breath from a sleeping giant. It had been years since I came here, Dad's favorite place, tucked behind the old textile mill hidden from the world. He used to bring me here when I couldn't sleep, when the numbers wouldn't balance in my head, or when the world felt just a little too sharp. He said the water was honest. It always moved forward. Never stayed in one place long enough to become bitter. I stepped onto the flat rock we used to sit on and pulled the old notebook from my bag. Leather-bound. The one they'd returned to me after the court proceedings wrapped up. I hadn't had the courage to open it until now. Inside, in my father's unmistakable blocky handwriting, were blueprints, market forecasts, and letters. Pages of thoughts written to no one. And some to me. One in particular had stopped me in my tracks. If she ever tries to take it from you, remember this, kid. You're not the business. You're the legacy. And that can't be signed away. I read it again now, the words blurring in the damp morning light. I had built something new. Something he would be proud of. But it wasn't about the empire anymore. Or Judith. Or even revenge. It was about roots. About identity. About finally knowing who I was outside of the mess they tried to make me. I folded the page carefully and tucked it back inside. Then I took the tiny urn out of my coat pocket. It wasn't much, just a pinch of my father's ashes that I'd held on to. The rest had gone into the family mausoleum where Judith had placed that marble plaque, like she was writing the end of the story. But she didn't get the last word. Not anymore. I scattered the ashes into the river. "Thank you for believing in me, Dad," I whispered. The wind caught them. They danced for a moment in the air, then disappeared into the moving current. I stayed there until the sky turned gold. Back at the car, my phone buzzed with emails and calls. Opportunities. Press. Speaking invites. A request from a nonprofit wanting to feature Ironclad's hiring practices. I answered none of them. Not yet. Because I knew now that my life didn't begin or end with what Judith tried to take. It began here. In places she never touched. With memories and principles she couldn't rewrite. And that was more powerful than any court order, contract, or crumbling empire. Back at the office the next day, I walked through the warehouse floor in boots and a hoodie, nodding to the crew. They didn't see a victim. They didn't even see a CEO. They saw me, a woman who didn't just survive betrayal, she turned it into a new beginning. And maybe that's the real revenge. Not bitterness. Not even karma. But joy. Peace. A life that no longer needs to look backward. So if you're listening right now, if you've ever been written out of your own story, erased, silenced, or told you don't belong, I want you to remember something. You're not what they tried to take. You're what you choose to build from the ashes. And no one can steal that from you. Thanks for listening to my story. If it moved you in any way, make sure you like, share, and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your own story of strength. And don't forget to subscribe. New episodes drop every single day. I'll see you in the next one.